Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. Thanks for letting me speak. I'm here to talk about Filament. My job is at Canyon GBS. I'm a software engineer. We build open source public sector software, mainly using Filament and Laravel. And I just wanted to take this opportunity to have more of like a relaxed session about what Filament is, how to get started using it, how to add it to an existing app. And yeah, I'll just dive straight into what Filament is. So Filament started in 2021, primarily as like a Laravel admin panel package. But kind of over the years, it's evolved to allow users to build all sorts of different apps with it. And probably the best way to show you is by showing you our demo. So you can find this online at demo.filamentphp.com. But essentially, this is an example admin panel that you can build with Filament. So I've got many different features here. The dashboard is where you can add widgets. Widgets could be stats or charts. You can add tables. You can add any custom content you would like as well to dashboards. And all of this is using Laravel, Livewire, Alpine.js, and Tailwind. So if you've ever written Blade, you can add a widget or any other component to Filament. We also have a concept of resources. So this is similar to other admin panel software as well. So resources are like CRUDs for different eloquent models that you might have in your Laravel app. So for example, we have a customers resource, which has like a list page, edit page. You can delete. You can also manage relationships to these records. So for example, if I clicked on this row, it's going to open a modal to edit. We have things like bulk actions and many different components for you to play with. I think there's about 20 or 30 form fields built into Filament, and there's all sorts that cater to different types of data that you want to manage. So how does the code look for something like this? Well, Filament is built on Laravel and Livewire, and it really leans heavily into the concept of PHP configuration. So everything you see is built using PHP configuration objects, and each object controls a different component. So the idea is that you don't really have to leave PHP to be able to build a UI like this. Filament's going to take that configuration, it's going to translate it into whatever HTML, CSS, JavaScript you need to render. The only real time you need to touch JavaScript or CSS or HTML is when you want to build a custom component. And those work in very much the same way to the built-in components. So this is what the code looks like for a form. So on the left is a form that is rendered using Filament, and on the right is the code that we use to render it. So each field is represented by a different class. So we've got text input, select, toggle, markdown editor in this example. And we also have a grid component, and that is a type of layout component. So layout components can nest other components within them infinitely. So you can create any sort of layout you would like using this structure. It's not just how the form looks, though. It's also how the form works, which is defined in PHP. So we've got methods like required and max length, and they are validation methods that apply on both the front end and the back end at the same time. So you're only maintaining one set of rules for that. Forms and other components in Filament are also contextually aware of how they're being used in the app. So for instance, the unique method on the slug is adding the unique validation rule in Laravel. Now, if you've ever used that, you'll know that you have to usually pass in like the table name and the column name. But because Filament knows that this form is to edit a particular eloquent model, we automatically pass that in for you. So you don't have to duplicate that sort of information. We also have methods like relationship on the select. So because we know what eloquent model we're in, we know what relationships it has, and we can load the options into that select based on the options in that related table. So we don't have to go through and make a manual eloquent query that only loads a certain number in, then does searching and everything. Like Filament does all of that for you. We also have behavioral methods. So I'm not really talking about actual business logic here. I'm talking about like little interactions on the form. So for example, this name field here will automatically generate the slug when you change the name field. So this uses Livewire, and each time you type, That live method tells Filament to make a network request to Livewire and to run that after state updated function. So that's a hook function that runs with the new value of the input. So each time that runs, it's going to make a request, run that function, and then set the slug field using that helper to the slug value of that state. This is a very simple example, and you can achieve this without making any network requests, but it's an example of how forms can be interactive and dynamic in Filament. If you have two selects, for example, you might make one live and then the other one dependent on the value of that first select to make like a dependent select situation where you can have different options loaded based on the previous select and things like that. We have tables, so there's quite a lot of UI that gets rendered with a very simple configuration here. So each column maps out to a different Eloquent attribute on the model of the table. So the table has these different columns. Each column could be searchable, sortable, toggleable, so you can hide it or show it in the table. And all of the Eloquent queries that back this table are generated by Filament. You can customize all of them, but by default, you don't have to write any Eloquent queries either. Columns like the customer column use the customer.name relationship. So this is going to eager load all of the customers in and display their name. It'll also make them searchable and sortable in the same way. You don't have to worry about N+1 queries. Filament handles all of that. We also have other things that affect the query, like summarize. So summarize on the column will tell the query to add a new aggregate to the query to sum all of the total for this page and also all the pages in the table as well. So that gets loaded in as part of the query and then output in the table automatically. We have formatting methods like badge and date. We also have the concept of filters. So filters can use any Filament form field from the forms package and output a form for filtering the data, and then you basically use that data from the form to modify the Eloquent query. A lot of the time, Filament does that for you anyway. We have pagination and also actions. So each row can have a set of action buttons, and we can also have bulk actions that affect multiple rows in the table. Now, actions are also their own separate concept in Filament, and an action is defined like this. So you can insert an action anywhere in the app, and to start with, you have configuration for like how the button looks. So you might want it to look like a button, you might want it to look like a link or a badge. You can customize the color, and Filament has a few predefined colors like danger, success, info that dictate how they're used, but you can define whatever colors you want. And on top of just controlling how the button looks, you can also control what happens when the button's clicked. So for example, it can open a modal. In this case, the modal has an icon, heading, description, and then when you click that delete confirmation button, it's then also going to fire the action function. So again, there's this tight-knit integration between the front end and the back end here. Obviously, you don't have to do your business logic directly in action function. You can inject your own action class or service class from the container. Like all of the functions are like dependency injectable, so you can do that. We also have the concept of notifications. So notifications can be sent from any request, and they appear as flash notifications in the top right of the user's screen. You can add icons and title, and you can add like buttons and things to them as well. We also have a few built-in types of actions. So like delete action and delete bulk action are two examples of built-in actions we have. And they are pre-built by the framework to simplify a lot of like the common Eloquent operations that you might have. So deleting, editing, creating, restoring, force deleting, things like that. So all of that, you don't really have to keep writing out these like configuration objects. You just use the pre-built one, and a lot of the time that'll work as well. So Filament isn't just a collection of components like this. It's also an entire system of like how to structure an admin panel, and it handles all of the routing for you. So you can optionally use a Filament panel, and a panel is installed into a Laravel app. You can actually have multiple panels in a Laravel app as well. And each panel has a directory structure like this. So for example, a panel might be in the app directory, and it might have resources, and each resource has its own directory as well. So you might have a products directory that handles all of the products CRUD configuration. So we've got the resource class that kind of registers everything, like handles all the routing and things. We have pages, and each one of those represents a different page. So if you wanted to make specific customizations on what is displayed on that page or how it works, maybe customize the operation for a certain like functionality like create, then you'd actually want to edit that page class. We have a few configuration files like product form, products table. So these basically make it so that the files don't get too, like the configuration files aren't too long, and you can also reuse these across multiple points in the app. We have these optional like actions and filters classes. So these basically extract away some repeated logic for a component and make it so that you can reuse a component in multiple places as well quite easily. We also have this concept of relation managers that I showed a little bit in that demo, which are basically components that you can insert into a resource, and they will manage the relationship of that resource. So they will render a table, and then each table row represents a different related record. You can add them, attach them, delete them, etc. So when I'm building like a system like this, it's really important I think about how can I make this system apply and be relevant to like the most amount of projects in the community, because so many projects are very different, and there are sort of like some guidelines that I try and hold myself to make sure that it's a good fit for a lot of projects. So to start with, conventions like these allow you to easily switch between different like Filament apps and immediately like feel at home about where everything's configured. Like a lot of them feel exactly the same to actually write code in. You know exactly how the configuration works. You know where to look for something when you want to change something. Laravel does this very well as well. And one thing I like to do is to not actually enforce these conventions too hard. Like, yes, the CLI will generate things according to convention. The documentation might mention conventions as well. But if someone wants to deviate from those conventions, they're more than welcome. Like maybe they have a different opinion. Maybe they have technical reasons why their project can't be structured like this. But like, for example, at work, we have a whole modular system where each module has its own Filament resources and pages and widgets. And that works absolutely fine. And Filament kind of has a little bit of a modular integration as well. But the next thing I want to think about when I'm building Filament is like allowing you to have stable extension points. Because Filament isn't always going to do everything you want it to. Maybe you want to extend it with your own functionality or own components. And these extension points allow you to do that safely so that we're not breaking your code when we update and change something internally, and you're not breaking our code when we update. We've actually got a community of over 500 plugins that people in the community have created, many of which are open source, that use these extension points for all sorts of things, and you can actually save a lot of time by reusing what other people have like bundled together. I also make sure there's quite a neutral design to start with, like make it most appropriate for a lot of different apps that want to use it. But also, if you want to change something, there's less things to override if I don't make like outrageous design decisions that you then have to undo with a lot of CSS. Useful default behaviors. So what I'm talking about here is like the most common default behavior. The most common behaviors that you are using in your app should probably be the default ones that I'm like exposing. But also, the default behaviors should be customizable. So there is actually a concept and an API in Filament where you can customize the defaults for any component. So you can maybe make all text columns bold, for example, and you can do that and customize those defaults. Finally, deep integration with Laravel. So Laravel has a ton of features like Eloquent and relationships and policies and observers. And being able to lean on these features allows us to allows the user to write less code, because we can introspect quite a lot of what's already going on in the app without needing them to redefine it. Also, like there are so many Laravel packages, we try and make sure that Filament plays nicely with a lot of those packages that people use a lot, because again, it's less time that they have to spend working around that or building their own integrations. So I want to take this next part of the talk to more of like a demo, and I want to demonstrate how you would go about building like a simple panel in an existing app. So what I've got is a Laravel app. It's quite empty. It hasn't got any controllers or anything because not really relevant here. But we've got a set of models that I've created. All of these models have their relationships defined between each other. The concept of the app is kind of conference management. So we've got attendees, conferences, speakers, talks, and tickets. And each of these relate to each other. We also have things like enum casts on particular attributes, and we've got an enum case here as well. And we've got factories and migrations for those models, and I've seeded a lot of data into the database already just to make the demonstration easier. But what we're actually going to do is we're going to use Filament to generate a lot of this code for us to start with, and then we're going to make those tweaks on top of the generated Filament code to show you how quickly you can get something up and running. So, close that. And to start with, I need to install Filament. I have Composer required it already because I didn't know what the internet connection was going to be like. But I have not installed anything other than that. I actually need to install a Filament panel now. So this will create a panel and it will publish all of the assets from Filament into your app. They're all Git ignored and everything, so you don't have to worry about that. So I'm going to run PHP artisan Filament install. I'm going to install the panels package. This is going to ask me which panel do I want to install. So maybe you might have an admin panel, a customer panel, a different panel for a particular use case like a CRM. I'm just going to go with the default admin. And what that has done is it has created a service provider. Now that service provider has been automatically registered and it contains the configuration for this panel. So I've got things like the path of the panel. So this is like the where you find it, like on the root. You can add features like login, registration, email verification, password reset, profile, multi-factor authentication. All of these are basically configuration options on the panel, and each panel can have a different configuration. You can also change things like the color. So if I go to the panel currently, if I go to the login page, you can see that it's amber. But I can change this to blue, for example, or you can also use a custom color. This is just a constant with a ton of color values. But if you use a custom color like blue, it will just reflect. We also have configuration for where the files are located in the panel. So where do you want to put your resources? Where do you want to put your pages? You can call this like multiple times for a panel and register them in multiple places at once, for example. You can also manually register things that are outside of that directory. You can have widgets, so that's for the dashboard. These pages are custom pages that are outside resources, so you can add as many pages you want to the panel that aren't necessarily in a CRUD if you have something custom to do. And you can control things like the middleware as well. And there are loads of different configuration methods, probably nearing 100 configuration options for a panel. So I'm going to go and log in. And you can see that by default, the panel doesn't have anything. I want to create a resource, so I want to create a CRUD, probably to start with for conferences. So I'm going to go back to the CLI. I'm going to run PHP artisan, make a Filament resource for conference. And it's asking me what the title attribute is. So this is like the main attribute that you would use to identify like this conference is this conference, this is a different conference. Like I want to display the names of conferences in the UI. So for each one, it's distinguishable. I want to generate a view page. So by default, Filament just includes list, edit, and create pages. But a view page is like a read-only page for people who don't have access to edit. So let's say yes. And should the configuration be generated from the current database columns? So this option here is actually going to read all of the database columns for that model. And Filament's going to generate a configuration for that model based on those columns. So if I go into the browser and I refresh, you can see I've got conferences now in the sidebar. If I click here, I've already got all of the columns that I have defined in the database. I can click into this. This is the view page. Click on the edit page, and I've got that. I've got the delete functionality. Go back to conferences, and I can click new conference. I can create a new one. And this is kind of like read the database and generated this configuration. So to start with, let's do a simple customization. So let's change the icon in the sidebar to be a different icon. So I'm going to open the conference resource class. This is basically the registration class for all of the different pages and functionality that the conferences have. And I'm going to change this navigation icon. So by default, we include a set of hero icons, which are the Tailwind icon pack. I'm going to change this to be outlined building library. And I'm going to go back. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. So you can see the icons change, for example. But if we go into some of the other configuration classes, like conference form, you can see all of the inputs and the validation that's added. You can go into conferences table, and that's added the different columns with like sortable and searchable, toggleable. It's recognized some as dates, some as date times. It's added, because it knows that the model is soft deletable, it's added things like trash filter, so you can actually go ahead and filter out or filter in deleted records as well. And it's got a set of actions as well. So these are the buttons you can see at the end of each row. You can customize like the order of the buttons, for example, and then that will just be reflected in the UI. And you can customize any of the actions by just chaining methods on, like I want this to be a different color, or I want this to have a different label, or this needs to do something. Let's go ahead and generate another resource. So I'm going to generate one for the attendees. And again, each attendee has a name. I want a view page. I want to generate it from the current database columns. And I want to generate one for speakers as well. So each speaker has a name. I want a view page. I want to generate the current columns. And I'm going to go ahead and customize those icons so we can easily distinguish between the different resources. So attendee resource might have outlined users, and speaker resource might have outlined chat bubble. Let's go back here, and we've got attendees exactly the same way. We've got speakers in exactly the same way. So this is a flat CRUD. There's no relationships between the different models. So let's add our first relationship. So imagine we wanted to build conference software where the staff on the door of the conference want to manage the tickets and check the different attendees into the conference. So ideally, we'd come to the conferences resource. We'd select which conference we were checking people in for, like this one, and then we'd see something like a tickets table below here, so that the users can search for the particular person and then check them in. So let's create a relation manager. So I'm going to close those. I'm going to run PHP make Filament relation manager. So which resource would like to create this relation manager in? So we're managing the conferences. What is the relationship? So if I go into the conference model, I've got a tickets has many relationships that I can manage. So I'm going to use that, tickets. It's asking me if I want to link it to an existing resource. So if I had a ticket resource, what this would do is it would say, let me grab the form on the table from that and just reuse that instead of having to find it again. But I don't have a ticket resource, so I'm not going to do that. Again, do I want them to be viewed? Yes. Should I generate from the current database columns? Yes. What's the title attribute? So I'm going to give it a name, ticket. And now it's saying that it's created the relation manager and I have to register it in that resource. So in the conference resource, I need to register it in the getRelations method. So in the conferences resource, I'm going to go to the getRelations method and register the tickets relation manager. This has been created within the relation managers. Don't directory. So it looks very similar, but in this case, because it's a relationship, it's basically just put the form, the info list, which is the view version, and the table in the same class. You could move these to separate classes if you wanted to. And let me go back to browser, and you can see that this has now added a tickets interface. So I can do things like delete, edit the tickets, create a new ticket. I want to be able to check people in, so I'll do that as well. But these are the default actions that you can do on a relation manager. Now I'm actually going to remove the associate and dissociate actions because you can't associate a ticket from a different conference. It doesn't make much sense, so I'm going to remove that. So let me go down here and delete the associate action and the dissociate action and the bulk action version as well. I'm going to go back and those buttons are gone. So what I probably want for checking in someone, I don't want to have to go into the edit, because if I go into the edit, I could check someone in, but then I have to select exactly when they were checked in. That doesn't seem optimal. So I want to add a new button next to view, probably, where you can check someone in easily. So that is an action. So I'm going to start a custom action. So an action is defined with this class here. I'm going to make an action called check in, and let's see what that looks like. So we have check in blue. So I actually want to put that in green, and the green color in Filament by default is success. So I'm going to use success, and again, go back. Yep, it's green, and I want to give it an icon, not that one. And I want to use the her icons again, so I want check mark. Let's go back. And now when I click on any of these buttons, it doesn't do anything because I haven't told it what to do. What I actually want it to do is open a modal so that I can confirm that I want them to check in first before I go ahead and do it. So let me add requires confirmation. This is a shortcut for setting up a modal with are you sure you want to do this text with an icon and a heading and everything. So I'm going to add requires confirmation. I'm going to go back and I'm going to click on this check-in button, and now I've got a modal. So it's asking me, do I want to check in? When I click confirm, nothing happens because I haven't told it what to do. So I'm going to now tell it what to do. I'm going to say this action is going to run a function, and I want it to get the existing ticket. So this is the ticket for the current row that I'm clicking the action on. And I want to set the timestamp for the checked in at column, I think. Yeah, so checked in at is the column. So Laravel has a helper called touch, and that just sets the timestamp and saves it. We go back. I'm going to check this person in here that hasn't already checked in. So check in, confirm, and I'll set the timestamp in the table. Now I also want some confirmation that I actually did the right thing. So let me use the notifications feature. So I'm going to say notification make. I'm going to say the title is going to be checked in. I'm going to say this is success so that it's in green and also has an icon with a check mark. I want to send this notification. Like that. Let me try again. Confirm. And now we've got a toast notification for that operation. I also want to be able to customize when they were checked in at. So by default, I want them to use the current timestamp, but I also want them to be able to specify their own time that they actually check them in so they can do it retrospectively. So to do this, you can add extra content to this modal here. I'm thinking we should add a date picker, below the description text and above the buttons so that you can select a new date if you want to. So I'm going to add a schema. And a schema is just a way of adding different components into an action, but there's also schemas for forms and tables and things. So I'm going to define a schema for the action, and I want to put in a date time picker. Now this date time picker is basically going to be for checked in at. Doesn't really need to follow the name of the attribute, but that's fine. I don't want it to exceed the max date of now because you can't check someone in for the future. I don't want it to be required. But I do probably want there to be a custom label, so it says custom time, and I probably also want to say that below the content of the field, I want to say use this to change the time someone was checked in, for example. If I go back to the modal, you can now see that we've got a custom time there ready to be used. And you can see that all of the dates in the future are also marked out in grey. So how do I use this form data within the action? So I can actually inject it in this function. So I can say the array of data that I've got from the schema is then going to be used. So I'm going to say if the data checked in at is filled, then I'm going to actually set the checked in at to be that, and I'm going to save the ticket. And then if that isn't filled, I'm going to use touch still. So I'm going to go back and I'm going to say I want to check this person in for 2 hours ago, confirm. Now that's changed to 2 hours ago. But I probably also want to hide the button if they're already checked in, so we can do that as well. So let's say the button is hidden, but it's only hidden when they're already checked in. So we can pass a function here that says the ticket is injected in, and we're returning a Boolean based on if it's hidden or not. So we're saying if the ticket checked in at is not null, then we want to hide the action. So let's close that. Now you can see that only the ones that haven't been checked in now have the check-in button. So this is like the final stage of being able to check people in for this tickets table. Now, one final thing I want to clean up on this table a bit is these badges here. So we've got like early _ bird and VIP in lowercase. These are written like that because they're actually an enum, and the enum is in the ticket type class. So you can see we're actually using the backing values to output in the database because that's what the database contains. But what happens if I want to actually change like how that's presented? So what you could do is you could go into here and you could say something like format state using, and that basically changes how what is output basically. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use an enum feature in Filament. So Filament has quite a tight integration with enums, and they allow you to configure a lot of things without needing to define these labels every single time you're referencing that enum. So for example, if I implement the hasLabel method, interface on the enum, I can define a getLabel method, and this is going to return a label for each enum case. So I'm going to say return match this, so the current enum case. I'm going to say, so for the early bird, I want to say, that's a nicer way of presenting early _ bird. I want to do the same for VIP and the same for student. And now let's go back into the browser. And you can see that Filament's noticed that the enum has the hasLabel method interface, and it's now using those custom labels. Now there are a few other interfaces you can add to enums. So you can add things like hasColor. So each time we're outputting that enum, we then have a color for each case. So let's return a match statement. And for each one, I'm going to say the early bird is success, so that's green. VIP is danger, don't want to mess up. And student is info, because they're learning, I guess. So let's go back to the browser, and you can see that each one has its own color. Projector isn't very vibrant. But let's also do the same for icons. So hasIcon, and now each time we use this enum, they're all going to have the icon. So let's say getIcon, and do the same. So each one has a different icon. So heroicon, star, heroicon, shield check, and the student's going to have academic cap. Let's go back here. So we've got all the different icons next to the enums as well. So this is one place where we're using the enum, but say we had a different table in Filament that used the same column or the same enum, then all of this configuration will be remembered. Obviously, you can also change the configuration per column and everything, but this is just an easy way to do it across everywhere. For example, if I go into the edit form, we've got a simple select, and it's using all of those custom labels that we have as well here. Now, I did notice that this form is actually quite slow to load. It takes about half a second, I think, to actually load this modal in. And that's probably because we have way too many attendees seeded into the database, and that is slowing things down a bit. So let's optimize that select quickly. So easy way to do that is to find the select. So select make, we've got attendee ID. I'm just going to say this is searchable. This is now going to use backend search. It's going to only load 50 at a time, and it's going to make a database query on the backend via an API to only load in the ones we actually want. So let's search that. Then we've got all of the options that match that. As you can see, we don't have any preloaded into the select, so I'm going to preload on the select, and that now loads in 50 to start with, so we've got a head start on finding our attendee. And that's also much faster. That's pretty much instant, yeah. So we've got this management of a relationship, but we're not actually leaving the conference as a resource. What happens if the relationship is so complex that we can't just embed it in modals on the parent resource? So let's say that we need an entirely separate resource for managing the speaker's talks, because the talks might have a really long abstract or content, and we might need a lot of space to be able to manage those talks. So you can create nested resources. So a nested resource can be created through the CLI again. I'm going to say make filament resource, and this time it's going to be nested. So I want the model of this resource to be the talk model. Each talk has a title, not a name, and we want to nest this resource within the speaker's resource. I want a view page. I want to generate it from the current columns. Now, what this has done is it has created a resources directory within the speaker's directory, and these are all nested within the speaker's directory. So we've got this, but we don't actually have any UI for managing talks for a speaker, because although the roots exist for those pages, we don't actually have anything displayed so that we can access those roots at the moment. So we can use a relation manager again, but this time we're going to actually link it to the talk resource. So I'm going to say, I want to put the relation manager in the speaker's resource. I want to manage the talks relationship. It's asking me now, again, what it asked me earlier, do I want to link this to an existing resource? I do want to link it to an existing resource because I want to use the talks resource that I created. So let's open that one. And now let's finally register it in the speaker resource. So in the speaker resource, I'm going to go to get relations. I'm going to manage the talks. Go back. I can now see I've got that talks table. Looks like a relation manager because it is one. However, when I click new talk, are actually nested within that parent resource, and all the breadcrumbs reflect that, the URL reflects that. If I try and create a talk, it's actually going to create it for the correct speaker, for example. Again, you can also view the talks, and that is also still remaining within that parent resource. And resources like this are infinitely nestable, essentially, within another resource. Finally, I wanted to demonstrate widgets. So I'm going to make a very, very simple widget very quickly, just to show you how to add things to the dashboard like this. So there are a couple of built-in types of widgets. One of them is a stats overview widget. So I'm going to say make filament widget, and I'm going to call it the stats widget, and it's stats overview. Obviously, you can create a custom widget. That's basically if you want to use your own blade view. A chart, stats overview table, I'm going to use stats overview. And I want to create it in a panel. You can add widgets in your own app. You don't have to create it in a panel if you don't want to. And I don't want to put it in a resource. I want to put it on the dashboard. So I'll say no. So that stats class contains this getStats method where I can return stat objects. So I'm going to say stat make conferences. I'm going to say conference count. So very simple count conferences. We can do the same for attendees and tickets. So attendee, ticket, go back, and I've got the counts for those as well. And we can go on forever adding all sorts of charts with all the different types. So like pie charts, line charts from Chart.js. We can add tables like relation managers and everything. We've also got automatic like global search, for example, where you can go through. Oh, okay, I did something wrong there. Where you can go through and search all of the different resources that exist in one place. So it's kind of easy access. Anyway, thank you for listening. We have just actually released version 4. We released it a few weeks ago, and it includes a ton of new features that I'm not going to go through now because there's so many of them, but we have a website where you can go to our blog, and there's a list and explanation for everything we've introduced new in the latest version. And yeah, check it out. It's all free and open source, and I hope it finds its way into your projects and it's helpful to you. I'd love to take any questions or demonstrate anything else that you're interested in with Filament. So thank you.
I've got a question.
Okay.
I've got two, actually.
Yeah.
Question one.
Mm-hmm.
If you had something where so you've got a form and it says, I don't know, it says like, what is your vehicle? And if it's a car, it has one set of questions. If it's a van, it's a different set of questions.
Yeah.
Is that something that just does?
Yeah. Yep. Let me connect to my hotspot quickly, because I'm not connected to the internet. So let me find the docs. So I've got an example of this, I think. I think it's in the advanced section somewhere. Yeah, dynamic fields based on the select option is probably what you're looking for. So, for example, we've got a select field here with two options, employee and freelancer. And then we have this set of fields that is just for employee and this set of fields that's just for freelancer. That's the sort of thing you're looking for, right? That's the sort of thing you'd want there. And there's explanation as to like what each part of the code does as well. Sorry, I'll stop scrolling so I can get a picture. Yeah, so this cookbook area of the documentation is all about like what happens if you want to hide a field based on another field or do this sort of thing. We've got that slug generation, or a bit more advanced version of the slug generation example where it checks to see if the slug's been changed manually or anything. Like dependent select options I went through as well, and things like that. But yeah, that is in the docs. Anything else?
I've got a second question, but I'll
Yes.
okay. First.
All right. Yeah.
How much flexibility have you got if you need to create custom elements? For example, what if a map you could select a polygon or something?
A map, yes. So to start with, I think, before I go into it, I think there's a map plugin. At least we only just released version 4, so I think about 150 plugins have updated and a few hundred haven't yet. I think this Google Maps plugin allows you to do that, but it does all sorts of like searching and scoping on the map, and you can kind of like zoom in certain things. I think Map Field might allow you to do that.
Pretty flexible as it helps to create sort of custom fields.
Yeah. So all of the built-in fields are using the same APIs as what you would use to create a custom field. So you've already got like 20-ish examples of how to create a custom field by looking at the built-in fields. But we've also got all of these plugins that will also show you how to do that. I've also got a series on Laracasts where I explain how to build components for Filament, like custom ones, and actually explains how Filament works internally and how like a custom field might be created, and all sorts of different custom components. So yeah, it's quite flexible. There's a lot of JavaScript involved in a lot of these components. So yeah, like maps and things are definitely achievable. Yeah. Yes?
What about rich text?
Oh yeah, rich text. Let's go into the speaker resource and open the talks. So we've got a text area here for the abstract of the talk. this is just simple text editing, but what happens if we want a rich text editor? So I have a text area here. Let's move to rich editor instead. So this is a built-in rich editor that we've introduced using TipTap. There's a ton of different options here. So obviously like the basic formatting stuff, alignment, headings, subscript, and everything combined in cursed ways. We've also got like things like tables, so you can actually add table columns like next to, or delete table columns, sorry, and rows, and you can like drag to resize them and things like that. And we've also got things like custom blocks, so you can actually create PHP classes that represent blocks in the rich editor, and then you can like drag those in to the content and insert like a hero section or a contact us section, and then you can define a blade view for each block, and then each time you render the content, it then renders the blade view for that block, and it will say like this is basically a framework that you could use to build content in like a CMS fashion for a homepage or anything really. But yeah, thanks for that one. Forgot about it. So.
I might be way off here.
Yeah.
Can you use it as a way of adding images to a site, to a database?
Yep.
Or the front end is already in place.
Yeah.
I'm thinking how you add items to eBay.
Yeah. So there's so obviously like in the rich editor you can insert images and things. You can upload them. You can upload them publicly or privately. It will do like temporary URLs and things within like a resource, like a resource form. This is in our demo, so you've got like an image upload field or any sorts of files, but images have previews and everything. So yeah, you can insert images, you can manage existing images as well. We also have integrations with like Sparty Media Library, which is like a package for media handling, so we'll automatically save the images to a separate database table and things. So yeah.
But would people need to be logged in already?
To be able to access those images.
I've seen other sites and you're sort of adding items before you've even logged in, so it gets you using it. Doesn't say
right. Yes. So Filament, all of the Filament components aren't just used within a panel. So a panel is like an authenticated context that you've got inside your Laravel app. So you can make this like guest friendly, but ideally you'd probably want this like embedded in your actual site. So what you could do is you can use our components like on their own. So let me just go into the documentation. We've got this components section here. So this is about how to insert the different components we've got in Filament into your existing app. So as long as you're using Blade, Livewire, Blade, anything, you can insert like a form, for example, in a Blade view. So this is going to explain how to insert a form into that. So to start with, you create a Livewire component, and that is basically the container for the form, and then you can insert that Livewire component into a Blade view. The styling is handled by Tailwind. So what you would need to do is there is a installation section where we say if you want to use the individual components instead of a panel, and then if you have an existing Laravel project, you can basically install Tailwind if you don't have it, and then you basically require whichever CSS file you actually need. So for forms, you'd probably want this one and this one. And that will then allow you to style, it would style all of the forms for you. But all of the interactive stuff would also work outside of a panel.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Is that like working well in like a modular system?
Yes.
Do you end up doing like multiple panels in each module, or you can find it if you want?
So you can do either. If you wanted a panel per module, you would have a service provider per module, which is a panel provider. So one of these panel provider classes within each module, and that would then register a separate panel per module. What we do at work is we have a single panel, and each module registers its own resources and pages into that main panel. What we've done is we've actually made each module kind of like a plugin, and a plugin in Filament is able to register resources and panels. So the plugin is installed into the system, and it gets automatically discovered and then it gets registered on the panel, and it means that panel is like a combination of all the different modules, all the different resources from the modules. So we could theoretically uninstall a module in our app, and it would remove that part of the panel, but the rest of it still is there. So yes, if you want to look at the app, it is open source. It's this one. But essentially, we've got this app modules directory, which is using the Internachi modular package. Don't know if you use that one. Each module is a composer package, which is then required by the base one. So, for example, I don't know if this one has Filament in it. Yes. So this is the basic needs. Let me zoom in. This is the basic needs module. It has Filament resources that it registers, like so. And we have a provider. And in that provider, we basically tell Filament that for each panel, this is how to configure defaults. And we're basically saying by default, the panel will register this plugin. And that plugin here is discovering resources. So that's how it works. So each module actually exposes its own resources, but it has its own models and database and everything. Yes?
The tenancy features are called Filament.
Oh, sorry. I've got tenancy features as well, yay. So we've so far looked at a panel that's used by a set of users. They probably all belong to the same organization. But if you have like a multi-tenant application where users need to be able to switch between different teams, for example, we have a whole load of like UI components that relate to that. So you can tell Filament that a particular model is the tenant model, and then it's going to add that tenant ID into the URL, and then you can use a switcher in the sidebar to switch between the different tenants, and that will automatically scope all of the queries down to that tenant based on which tenant you've got selected. If you've already got tenancy set up with like domain-based tenancy or like multi-database tenancy, then you don't really need to use Filament's tenancy because it kind of does its own thing. Like if you've already got a different database per tenant, there's no need to like, especially if they're on different domains, like there's no real need to switch between them often. And there's no need to scope down all the queries because they're in their own database anyway. So this is great for if you have one database that all the tenants share and all of the different tables have like a tenant ID on them. Filament can handle that. So we've got like a tenancy section. Or users, I think it's in the users, yeah, multi-tenancy in the documentation, but this explains like all of the different tenant features that we have. You can even do things like billing for tenants. So before a user can access a certain page, they have to like have a subscription. They can manage like the tenant profile, so they can like edit information about the tenants. So this is an example of how you would build more than just an admin panel in Filament. Like an actual set of users for your app could use a panel, and your admins could use a separate panel as well. But yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I've got a question. So you very quickly put together that conference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you start from scratch. You do that in a day.
Mm-hmm.
How do you go around creating like tests for that?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So Filament uses Livewire internally, and Livewire has its own testing suite of helpers. So a lot of the tests that you write are actually Livewire tests, but Filament includes many extensions for the Livewire testing helpers that allow you to test specific parts of Filament. So let me try and type Filament properly. I'm going to go into the testing. Yeah, so for example, testing resources. This is an example of how to test a resource. These examples use pest PHP, but they work with PHP unit. It's just whatever is inside your test method. So to start with, like you're using standard Laravel testing to act as a specific user because we use Laravel's authentication. But for example, you can use Livewire to test a specific page. And this is why each page is a different class. So you can say, load the list page, assert that the status is okay, assert that you can see a certain number of records in the table. This is looking for it's looking in the rendered blade view for the IDs of those records in like an attribute on the row. But you can do things like, when I search the table for this username, don't return this user, or return this user instead, or search it for a different one, and then you can basically test like the functionality of that. How would a user go about using the system, and what do I expect them to be able to see when they do that? Also, like sorting the tables. This is all like table-related stuff, and there's a load more table-related testing helpers in here that you can use for all sorts of things. But you can like test the create page, for example, and the create page loads the page in, fills the form with certain data, calls the create method, asserts that you get notified, asserts that you get redirected in a certain way, and then asserts that the database has that data in it. And there are different examples here of how to write tests. And all of these examples are using the helpers from all these other pages. So like testing tables, testing schemas. So this is about testing forms and info lists, like checking to see if a field is visible in a specific situation or not. Testing actions is a big one because like there's so many different steps of how an action actually works internally. So like call an action and what do I expect to happen after it's called? But also how do I test an action that's on a table? You know, like I pass in this testing DTO essentially, and I'm saying that it's on a table, or it's on a table and it's bulk, or it's an action that's associated with a particular form field. So I'm going to pass in the name of the form field there. And it's saying like testing the contents of the action modal. So like, what do I see inside the action modal? Is this action disabled in this particular situation? So there are loads of different situations where like these helpers would help you. There isn't a helper for everything because we try and create like some generic helpers as well. So this is quite a generic helper, this assert existence. Because what you can do is you can say, assert this action exists with this configuration. So you can call any of like the getter methods on an action object. So like get modal description, and you can assert that this modal description matches this. So if this Boolean is true, then it will pass the test. If it's false, it won't. But otherwise, we'd have to go like assert modal description on a table row is this, you know, like it would just be way too long. But this allows you to basically test anything because you'd say any configuration option is available in that function.
So you could have written tests for
Yes.
what we saw,
Yeah.
like behavioral tests.
Yeah. And I am also interested in expanding the testing suite to be browser testing suite as well, because Pest has just released a browser testing plugin which uses Playwright. So you could actually instruct a dummy Chromium browser to like perform different UI tests with like JavaScript interactions and stuff, and assert that there's no console errors, or assert that a specific front-end rendering thing has happened, like a drop-down's opened, something. I'd like to integrate that very soon, but Pest has only just released their browser testing plugin, and Laravel Dusk doesn't have the greatest developer experience, so I've kind of put it off for a while. But now Pest has come up with the browser testing stuff. I'm interested in doing that as well.
Well, I can see what you need to do browser testing for the framework, but presumably you were using everything out of the box anyway.
Yep, that's fair enough. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we want to add browser testing into the core to test that things like selects work and drop-downs work, because we don't have that at the moment. But I guess it might be useful for people who make custom components to test. So like mount this custom component, click this in the component, does it do this? Could be that. Yeah?
You've got the global search.
Yeah.
I'm curious how it works about the permission and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
what you're searching.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So with the global search, it is reading the resources authorization methods. So a resource has authorization methods. So these are the methods that we read from your policy automatically and which features they control. The global search is actually checking the view any permission to check to see if you can actually see them in the list. And then each item will then have a URL to like the view or the edit page based on what you have permission to. And I think if you don't have permission to do either, then it doesn't show it, I think. I might need to come back to you on that one. But what you can do though is you can customize the global search query. So say if you had a query that would say only certain, from the query that only certain users can access this subset of records. What you'd actually do is you'd probably use this method here, which is get global search eloquent query. So this is a method you define on the resource class, and this is what is being used to as the root of the query for that resource. So you can add any sort of scope to this, like where or where has. This is being used for eager loading. So for each global search result, we're actually eager loading the authors and the categories onto it, but we actually want to eager load that to start with to avoid n+1. Anyone else? Yeah?
Any language options?
Yes, many options. Do you mean for managing multilingual content, or do you mean for different interface language options? The change in the interface labels and things? Yeah, so packages, panels, resources, lang, we have languages. And a lot of people submit many PRs to me every day for updating these languages that I am happy to maintain. And yeah, so any of like the core UI text, so much of it is translated already. So then you're just responsible for translating your own strings. So form field labels, model labels for like resources and things. But yeah, we include a lot. Yeah.
What's the upgrade path from like 3.x or whatever like?
Yep. So the upgrade guide is here. Yeah. So basically, we have an upgrade script. It uses Rector internally, and we've created some custom Rector rules that will read your code base and upgrade it to be the new methods and the new structure. It won't do that because if I did that, I think I would break your code quite a bit, especially if you were referencing those in other places. But we do have a few other scripts that are optional to run, like upgrade the directory structure to version 4. So in version 3, the resource class was actually outside of the directory for the resource. We decided to move that in version 4 so that it's more portable, and you can use that script to do that. Apart from that, there are some breaking changes that we aren't able to handle manually because they might be like changes in behavior that we actually think are for the better. Like by default, we changed file uploads to be private visibility instead of public visibility. So for those sorts of things, we actually say, here's a snippet of code that you can put into a service provider that actually reverses that decision. So if you copy this into a service provider, you get back the version 3 behavior. But you can actually select, like maybe you're only using like the tables, for example. You can actually like uncheck all of these, and then it's actually going to scope down only the upgrade steps that you're actually affected by, and the rest of them are gone. So yeah, the upgrade, I've done the upgrade on a few apps. I think it's definitely something that's improving over time because as more people upgrade, they can make changes to the script that catch more things. And also they can add more things to the guide for the manual changes. I did like a medium-sized app in about 2 hours, and most of that was handled just by the script. But I just had to go through all of the pages and test that everything worked, really. And there were a few things I had to manually change.
how have you got like a core team? Like, I'm aware it's open source, but how many of you guys are there?
Yeah, so I'm kind of the core maintainer, but essentially we've got a ton of people who work on the project, and a lot of them do all the work that I don't have time to do, I really don't want to do, like customer support is a big one. We've got a great support team that are always in like the Discord giving free support, and on GitHub as well, GitHub discussions. So we've got a team of 10 people working on the project, but all different sorts of things. So like some people who do the marketing of the project, some people who do the development like myself, some people who do community support, some people who approve plugins for the website. So,
Is that all funded from like GitHub sponsors?
yep, so GitHub sponsors. So I've got a GitHub sponsors account, and we all work on the project, and I pay out the GitHub sponsors to everyone at the end of the month. So we split it based on how many hours we worked that month. So everyone says, oh, I worked 10 hours, I worked 5 hours, and then I split the money equally to everyone. Yeah?
How much of your day job is spent using Filament versus your not day job making the tools so that you can make your day pleasing?
Yeah. I think like in reality, like only 25-30% of my day job actually is interacting with Filament, because as you know, like building an app is a lot more than just the UI. It's like I'm spending a whole lot longer in Laravel's queue system than I am in like Filament. But it's a decent chunk because all of our UI is built on Filament. So there's a decent amount of time where I'm using the framework and I'm trying to like think about what is more difficult than I think it should be, and how can I improve this. So I'm constantly using the work to improve the tool.
I suppose your day job is obviously like so there's a battle, isn't there, between like doing tooling.
Yeah.
It's like stuck in the mud, right?
Yeah.
Stuck in the mud, you find a way to get out so that you can get out quick. So is a flip flop between making it easier for you to do the thing, but also for
Yeah.
you to
To be honest, like the only things that I'm fixing with priority are like bugs and things that are actually interrupting things. But when I'm just like thinking about how to improve the framework, a lot of that's done in my own time, like re-architecting things and improving, like adding new features. Unless there is a specific feature that we're building at work that requires a new feature for the framework.
So you're thinking sort of more holistically about rather because I guess a general user of Filament would be thinking about their plugin, but without having to really worry about change, adapt from what you've got to with your solution, whereas you've got the option of zooming out.
Yeah, and thinking about all the different like examples of projects that I built. Like I used to work at an agency before this as well, so I have a lot of experience dealing with client projects using Filament as well. So it's not just the ones that we have open source. I've probably worked on like at least 10 or 20 client projects using Filament now. So I've seen a wide range of different use cases and where it falls down, where it's good. And a lot of version 4 improvements were made because like I felt pain in some way, like doing it on a project.
So that must be interesting then with agency, because having gone through longhand ways and then using frameworks and go, well, how do I cost this using a thing that I know it's going to take really, because it's like you're delivering the value of the thing rather than you spent a lot of time making it really quick to do a thing, but you're getting the value of, you know, your 10-minute form change is because you spent 10 years making this 10-minute form.
That's true. But to the client, it's the same change at the end of the day. Like they're having the same result.
Yeah, that's the thing, and I think I mean, I've dealt with tradesmen like that who go, well, we've quoted 3 days, but we've quoted 2 days, and we should get the advantage of it. You know, so there is that sort of...
If it's the same quality, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what's the agency. But what I would say is that while there are those small like label changes and ordering things and adding a new field here and there that don't take very long, is that what you want to be doing with your day all day?
Yeah.
Or do you want to be dealing with like interesting problems? And that's where Filament comes in, because Filament allows you to not care about anything that like is incredibly boring and like repetitive, creating components, maintaining a framework about how the UI is structured, and you're focusing only on like the business problems, like the business logic. You control all of that still, and you're just handing over your like interface. Yeah.
Question about that, because it does seem sometimes it's like the separation between UI and business logic. I can't remember now. It was one of the examples you had some constraints defined, which to me feels like business logic. But it's I mean, if you've got your Filament, and you want to do an API thing, would there be any constraints or anything that's business logically defined in Filament that you then have to repeat in the API?
I think if I found myself repeating it, I would then look at extracting it. I mean, to be honest, a lot of the actions and things that I have in actual projects are extracted out into their own classes anyway. So instead of doing the thing directly in the action function, I will inject the action class or the service class, and then I will execute that. And then if I create an API, I'm just going to call that same action. And for something like, this is probably interesting to show you a little bit how this works. So, for example, create speaker. This is a page. And by default, this will have a handle record creation method. So in the parent version of this create speaker, all we're doing is we're creating a new model. If we have a parent record, so if we have like a nested resource where we've got a parent, we're associating that with the parent, saving it. If not, we're just saving it and then returning it. So what you can do, and this is perfectly legal and it's documented, is just do your own thing here. So you could even, like for a resource create page, you could just call your own action here, pass the data in the same way. If you wanted to transform it into a DTO first, you can do that, and then return whatever model you got, and then that's going to be used to do the redirect.
So you could actually completely almost decouple from Eloquent, I suppose. I mean, obviously you would want to, but
So with the non-Eloquent stuff, so obviously forms and forms themselves are just agnostic to Eloquent, really. Like there are a few features that you need Eloquent for. So like doing a select relationship isn't going to work if you don't have Eloquent. But you can define a form as a component, and you don't have to have Eloquent for that. Now, a resource itself, like resources as a concept, is an Eloquent-only concept. Like everything from the routing to the like forms to the tables is all Eloquent. So you wouldn't be able to use a resource without Eloquent. However, if you had an app where you wanted to use a Filament form and define your form in the same way as you would in Filament, then you wouldn't need Eloquent necessarily. You could just render a form on its own. With tables, one of the version 4 features we added was the ability to add a static data source for a table. So let me go into tables and find custom data. So this is a way that you can define a table, but instead of using Eloquent, you can just pass in whatever data you want into this records function, and then all of the columns and everything else is going to work exactly the same. So this is just like a static array, but you can inject things such as the current sorting column, current sort direction for, and then return a different set of data for that. Or search yourself inside that collection, return the data, and then return it from this records function. And you could always extract this out into like an invocable class if you wanted to, where you didn't have this in the Filament configuration, you just have this in your own service, for example. Here's an example of using an external API to power a Filament table. So make the API request, return the products to the table, render it, and then you can go and do stuff like pass the sort to the API and return that, or pass the search to the API and return that, and the filters and all of the different features that we have available then work with a static data or a custom data source instead of with Eloquent.
That static data, is that 4.x stuff?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. Filament tables were quite heavily tied to Eloquent before version 4, just because we wanted to really focus on getting the Eloquent experience right and not affecting not making the API worse for the sake of people not using Eloquent, because like in reality, like 99% of people are using Eloquent who are using Filament currently, so we need to get that nailed down. But then we were able to focus on things like that, which were quite a big rewrite for like the internals of a table, but it's worth it now because now you can use anything to power a table. It's going to do less for you than using Eloquent. But okay, is that it? Okay. Well, thanks everyone. Thank you.